All right, that was a very pleasant note there. Jim, let's move on here with another question. This one, it's actually a couple questions here, was sent via the Cult of Cornette Facebook group by Anthony Muriel. I know you have spoken about the split between Jarrett and Gulas, and a possible split between Lawler and Jarrett. Two things. How would Memphis wrestling be if the split never happened? Also, and this is a separate question, how would Georgia wrestling be if Gungle had won the Georgia Wars? Those were two pivotal moments in Southern wrestling. I'm curious how different those territories would be given everything that took place.
Good Lord, that might be an essay question that we shouldn't have tackled at the end of the program, but briefly.
It's a great question. What ifs? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing is with the Tennessee War, the thing that they were doing incredible business in both ends of the territory. At that time, Nick's end, Nashville, Birmingham, Chattanooga, was still doing good business. In 1977, 78, they were still doing decent houses in Nashville, but actually Chattanooga and Birmingham were always bigger towns for Nick going back to the 50s and 40s than Nashville because of the size of the buildings. But Jarrett had made Memphis and Louisville and then Lexington, he hadn't opened it yet in 77. He'd made Memphis and Louisville pretty much the number one and number two towns in the territory. And so if they hadn't split, if Nick had still had control, I don't know that what happened to Nick's towns, Nashville, Chattanooga, and Birmingham would have also happened to Memphis, Louisville, and later Lexington, because it was two different talent crews for the most part and two different booking operations, but it would have hampered Jarrett's expansion to make his towns bigger because Nick's at the same time were going down. So Jarrett divested himself of having to deal with the money losing half of the territory, and that's what Nick kept. And Jarrett's got bigger and Nick's got smaller.
In terms of that split, what if the split doesn't happen? How do you see?
Well, that's what I'm saying is the Nick's end may have eventually drug. I mean, they had to break up sooner or later, but Nick's end would have drug Jarrett's end down more.
Well, that's the big thing, I guess. Do you think the breakup had to happen, or is there a way that for the next 4 or 5 years, Nick and Jerry Jarrett are partners and Jerry Jarrett's running the show?
I don't think Nick and Jerry could have been partners because Nick would have rather been partners with George. That's the problem to begin with. George Gulas was the reason why Jarrett finally said, I'm not bringing George to Memphis. I've seen what he's done to these other towns, or what he's doing to these other towns. They were still okay, but they wouldn't be long. Without Nick being able to, even though it was two territories under one basic office, Nick still had access to guys that were coming in to work for Jarrett and vice versa. So his town stayed strong, even if Jarrett wasn't booking them. But when it was a choice, you had to go to Tennessee to work for either Jerry Jarrett or Nick Gulas. All the talent came to work for Jarrett. And Nick's territory, same thing as Sheik and Bruiser. Sheik was making shots. It was Luke Graham, the Sheik, Abdullah the Butt. It was the Over the Hill gang, plus George and others that Nick could afford. And that's what killed Chattanooga, Birmingham. And he lost Birmingham to the Fullers. He lost Chattanooga to Georgia. And then he finally ended up selling Nashville to Jarrett for a mercy payoff 3 years after the split. Because he just couldn't get the talent and the booking was old, the territory was stale, and he was still featuring George. He didn't learn anything.
Were there ever issues pre-split with Lawler? Actually, I don't know. How much was Lawler working Nashville pre-split? And were there ever issues about him not working there enough, considering how much
No,
he
he
meant to Memphis?
he worked Nashville all the time when Nick owned it because he was still living in Nashville. And finally, when Jarrett split off, that's when he moved to Memphis, and he didn't want to work Nashville on Saturday nights. But he was in Nashville a lot in the days when he was working with Fargo and Dundee and all those guys. You know, he was an attraction in Nashville. And that's why 74, 75, 76 was really strong. And then 77, all the established talent people gave a shit about went to work for Jarrett, and Nick was bringing in, you know, guys that he could afford, and he had George and Bobby Eaton, bless him.
Do you think Jerry Jarrett's wrestling would have done better than, as good as, just about the same, whatever it may be, to Southeastern wrestling, which would get a lot of those towns?
Yeah, you know, I think Chattanooga had been with Gulas and Welch since like 1950, I believe. But it made more sense geographically to be part of the Georgia territory. And the TV was, after Nick and Roy had Harry Thornton as a partner, a local Chattanooga TV personality and morning show host, etc., that's where they had the great run, where they'd sell 20,000 tickets a month sometimes at the old Chattanooga Memorial Auditorium, weekly shows. But by the mid-70s, Chattanooga's so close to Atlanta, they're seeing these big main event, all the top stars in the NWA coming into Atlanta, and they're still getting Nick's guys. And so Chattanooga just kind of, Nick started bringing in Georgia talent to help draw, and they ended up taking it over. And with Birmingham, that was the same thing. The Fullers just took it. They had better talent, a better show, and all Nick was left with was Nashville.
The Georgia War. What happens if Van Gungle wins? What happens if somehow, and it's crazy to try to figure out the scenario that it would happen, based on everything that did happen and the problems they had. But if by 1974, the NWA Georgia office was getting their ass kicked, and Gungle Promotions was winning, what happens next?
If Gungle had been able to prevail in Atlanta, that still wouldn't mean that the NWA thought any better about them. And I think the problems would have existed that they still, let's say that the same talent, because you've said, and it's true, that Gungle couldn't get any talent and it just got stale and stagnant, and she had nobody to bring in to replace the people that were over initially for her, right? That still would have been the case, even if she'd won in Atlanta, even if those guys in Atlanta would have drawn money for the next 5 years straight. I think it would have damaged Atlanta in terms of being a wrestling center. The TV ratings would not have stayed as high to keep the 2-hour Saturday night block. And it certainly wouldn't have been the late 70s must-see cable TV show with stars from all over the country, from Florida, from Georgia, from the WWF, from wherever, everybody from Dusty to Andre. If it had just been Ann Gungle and the rest of the promoters still cutting her off for major name talent. So then technically, even if she'd been successful in Atlanta, it wouldn't have been a national product that would have sold on television, that people would have watched, that would have turned into Georgia Championship Wrestling, the top-rated station on TBS, that would have turned into Crockett's program, that would have turned into WCW. So she may have won the war, but then there wouldn't have been the other two wars the next 20 years. What do you think?
Do you see the NWA accepting her? If she wiped out Georgia Championship Wrestling, again, I don't know how that would happen. If Barnett doesn't come back, and somehow she wins with the talent she has, if there's no one else running against her, and again, I don't know how that would happen, would the NWA accept her, you think?
Well, would she have wanted the NWA to accept her? Would she have applied if she was still doing well? Think about that.
If it was the key to talent, if it was the key to more talent.
Well, but then at the same time, the NWA'd be pissed. See, the Bruiser, he didn't really use NWA talent, but nobody fucked with him for owning his home state. It was coexistence, right? And that had happened in other places, but not an NWA office hadn't had some opposition come in and run them off and put them out of business and take over a market. Can you think of San Francisco? Joe Malkowitz got taken over by Ray Shire. Or Roy Shire, rather.
Roy Shire. But Ray was his brother.
Ray was his brother, yes. Well, it's late in the day. But at the same time, I just saw letters I mentioned, I think, the other day from Gilzenberg to Jack Pfeffer said, I guess poor old Joe's never going to get his territory sorted out. They knew that with Gulas and Jarrett, they knew the NWA knew this. Our member is an idiot and he's going to lose this. So we're not even going to fuck with it. But when it was a legitimate office doing well and these upstarts take everything and fucking go off, they wouldn't have taken a loss very well of one of their major markets. They would have probably tried to fight. But I can't see Ann Gungle prevailing and that company being the national powerhouse that the Georgia program turned out to be, that the Crockett program turned out to be, and then the WCW turned out to be. So it might have helped her in the short run, but it would taken away a big opposing soldier in the war against New York.
Well, one way or another, Tom Ernesto was booking. Jim, one final question here this week. This was sent by Bobby Lamar Shea, or CA. I don't know what this is. Jim, what is the cure for the summertime blues?
Well, there ain't no cure for the summertime blues, is there?